Good evening, and welcome back to your adventure. I, of course, am Jack, aka Count Von Count, your narrator, storyteller, and guide through the lands of Kjlovania. I hope you're ready and excited to jump right back in where we left off last week. This one's going to be a good one. This, of course, is the Seven Masks of Malice.
So, he said, eyes steady, you received my letter. The man's eyes swept over them, seven strangers bound by little more than curiosity and coin. The hearth crackled between them like an unspoken challenge. The name's Captain Elias Vane, he continued. Withermarsh Guard, though that means less and less these days. Gabriel leaned forward first, voice soft and measured. You're the one who sent for capable hands, as the notice put it. Aye, Elias replied. Capable, desperate, or stupid. I stopped checking the difference long ago. His mouth twitched, the ghost of a grin. Whichever you are, you'll do. He pulled a chair closer, the wood groaning under his weight, and laid a worn map across the table. Its edges were frayed, the ink smudged with time and rain. Withermarsh is rotting, he said simply. People are vanishing from their homes. Caravans headed to Braxier are found stripped, horses dead, drivers gone. Those few who do stagger back speak of men in red hoods, men whispering an old name. Cassian's dark eyes lifted up from the map. What name? Elias met his gaze. Xavier. The name fell heavy. Even the wind outside seemed to hesitate. The people call it superstition, Elias went on. But the Crimson Sun's dogs have been sniffing around again. Same sigils, same robes, same fanatic gleam in their eyes. Whatever they're plotting, it's not charity. He paused, fingers drumming the table. If you help me uncover what's happening, if you can prove you're worth the steel you carry, I'll show you what lies beneath it all. But understand this, the church isn't what it once was. The same men who burned the monsters now sup with them in secret. Jackson leaned back in his chair, tail flicking idly. And here I thought this would be a simple job. Dion grinned. Simple is dull. Dion liked blood with breakfast. Leaf smirked. You can keep the blood. I'll take the breakfast. Elias stood, his armor shifting. You'll find both before long. He turned toward the bar. Ruin, rooms for these friends of mine. The barkeep looked up from polishing a cup that hadn't been clean in years. Rooms I've got, but sleep? That's another matter. There are a few empty rooms upstairs, though. Take your pick. If Elias vouches for you, you're good in my book. The fire popped. Outside, a low fog crawled along the ground, thick as breath. The seven strangers left the hollow hearth together when the rain softened to a whisper, the marsh steaming where the day's chill refused to die. They moved through lanes of warped planks and tilt-sunk pilings, past shuttered windows where slivers of lamplight cut through the mist. The town murmured in low voices, a cough behind a door, a prayer whispered through cloth, the scrape of a bucket along wet wood. Let's stay off the main path, Dorian said. We are being too loud. Good, Dion rumbled, fastening the strap of the accordion tighter across his back. Dion prefers loud. Leaf's eyes cut a sleek path over the nearby sheds and skeletal trees. Let's not audition for that forest. Dorian walked at a measured pace, blue runes under his armor breathing their soft cadence. The brass owl on his shoulder clicked a gear and settled, tiny glass eyes reflecting the world in thimble-sized moons. Gabriel moved like a rumor in a dark hall, poised but unhurried. Jackson's fiddle tapped gently against his thigh. He hummed under his breath, as if he was waiting to go on stage. Sir Seberic's armored weight made a quiet, iron snow of sound crunching over the soft ground, and Cassian watched the edges, eyes darting into the shadows and darkened windows. He paused near a house, looking deeply into the top floor open window. I'll be right back, he said quietly, and slipped into the alley between the houses. The group continued down a side street towards the edges of Withermarsh, all eyes scanning the encroaching darkness and watching for movement. The mud on the road held prints, boots, bare feet, cartwheels carving a drunken geometry. Near the edge of town they found the remains of what was once a fence and a gate, now mostly rotting wood and moss. Is it kids these creeps are taking? Sir Seberic hissed under his breath. I don't think he specified, but kidnapping children is light work for the church, Jackson replied. The group sat for a moment, weighing their options and looking back down the road towards the tavern. Look, there, Gabriel whispered. Orange light, slowly swaying with the cadence of an idle walk, appeared at the edges of the corner of the road, slowly growing larger, stretching the shadows towards them. Guards? Hoods? Muttered Dorian. Quick, a trap. Find me hay, cloak, and some string, Leaf said, already stripping a bundle of dry thatch from a sagging fence. Dorian, I need a heartbeat. Dorian knelt, drawing a neat framework from a coil of wire, joining it inside the hay with precise mathematical motions. Illusory resonance, he murmured. The ear is easier to fool than the eye. His metal hand traced sigils in the air, runes hovering for a moment like soft blue fireflies before sinking into the straw. A child's cry echoed in the moonlit fog, from under the shape of a child in a small ragged cloak, thin, sobbing, distant and helpless, threaded with a hitch any parent would know. Jackson arched his brow. Crude, he said, almost approving, but it sings. Seberic planted his shield in soft earth. Fancy isn't the point. The point is whether it works. It always works, Leaf said, and slipped into a shadow. They took their places, Gabriel in a blind corner of a fallen log, Dion crouched behind a lopsided stone where a shrine once stood, watching curiously, Jackson half hidden under a curtain of hanging moss, and Sir Seberic set like a boundary stone center left. Dorian closest to the decoy, the owl watching without blinking. Cassian appeared behind Dorian without a sound. What did I miss? What are we doing? He said. Shh, we're waiting, Dorian whispered back. They did not wait long. A low hum arrived with the torchlight, the syllables smoothed by distance, old liturgy shaved down to a blade. Two figures separated from the fog, robes dark as clotted wine, with their hoods low, the sigil of a brutal sun sewn onto their chests. The man on the left held up his hand and they both stopped chanting. Hush, he crooned to the child. No more fear. Dawn is kind to the obedient. The man reached out his hand to the child's shoulder, and it easily fell over into a pile of hay. What the? The seven appeared quickly, weapons and blades drawn, assuming enough to skip the pleasantries. Surrounding the pair of hooded figures, Dorian was the first to speak. What business do you have with the children of Withermarsh? Where are you two off to at this time of night? The man stared at the scattered hay, disbelief briefly softening the zeal in his face. Then his expression hardened, and he looked up at Dorian's glowing runes. You mock the light, he hissed. You have no right to question the chosen. Gabriel stepped forward, his voice smooth as water over glass. Chosen by whom? He asked. Because I've seen enough men in red claim divinity on false breath. The second cultist, a woman, voice low and cracked, took a step back but did not run. The sun does not explain itself to shadows, she said. You'll see soon enough. All things will burn in the dawn's light. Dion let out a boisterous laugh. Dawnlight? You realize it's midnight, right? Jackson twirled his fiddle bow idly in one hand, his tone mocking but curious. I do enjoy a sermon now and then. Go on, enlighten us. What is it that you're lighting the way toward? The man sneered. The Pale King returns. The false dawn ends. The world remembers its master. That name, the Pale King, carried weight. It seemed to pull the warmth from the clearing. Sir Seberic's voice cut through the fog, measured and grave. She's talking about Xavier again, he said. Isn't he the dead vampire that was buried in the mountains over 200 years ago? At that, the cultist smiled, a thin, devout kind of smile that belonged to those who had traded sanity for certainty. Buried, he said softly. He was never buried. He sleeps beneath the world you built, dreaming of the day you come crawling back to him. Cassian's hand drifted towards his crossbow. Then maybe we'll be kind enough to wake him ourselves. The woman lifted a small curved blade, the edge gleaming with some oily substance. You wouldn't dare. Dion's grin widened. Try me. Enough, Dorian said. You've got one chance to tell us where the others are, those who vanished from town, The caravans, the missing children, what's being done with them? The man's voice trembled, not from fear but from zeal. They've been purified, chosen for the right. You'll see. You'll all see. Leaf's knife turned slightly. Then show us, he murmured. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The cultist stood framed in an orange wash of firelight and fog, two silhouettes of devotion and madness. Then the woman laughed, a high, broken sound that turned the air brittle. Fools, she spat. You think there are only two of us? The marsh answered her. From the forest, a shadow appeared that turned into the shape of a man in a red hood, joined by another, and then two more stepped into the light. Dion beamed. Friends! With a growl, the robed figure closest to Gabriel threw a dagger that soared right over his shoulder, slicing a lock of his hair as it passed. Gabriel wasted no time as he silently darted forward. No whisper of spell work, no glamour, just a hand and a knife. A step, a turn, and a quiet delivery of steel. It was so clean that it may have been a bow. The cultist's hiss turned into a choked breath, and then to a wet breath, and then to a noise that stopped. As the hooded figure dropped to the ground, Gabriel looked up and realized he had been a little overzealous, as the other three figures stood shocked but surrounding him. Oh, hello, he said dryly. The rest of the group sprung into action. Cassian raised his crossbow, and his first arrow took a robed shoulder, and then, in a spark of brilliance, aimed his second at the torch one of the cultists held, striking the hand but sending the brazier flying into the forest, which after a pause bloomed into a tongue of fire. A ring of orange uncoiled from the base of the nearest tree, and it dashed itself along the ground, eating dry leaf, old bark, and the last respect of the underbrush. The clearing lit in a wash of ember gold. Very subtle, Jackson muttered, rolling to avoid the swing of a sword. Dramatic, though, I'll give you that. Light is light, Dion said, and rose into the brightness like a storm with a human face. His mace carved a clean arc. A cultist screamed, and then it didn't. Siberic met the men closest to Gabriel, coming to his aid, shield up, sword low. One blow and then a second on the return, efficient, unkind. He drove them back with the pointy end of his sword, and then broke a wrist with the edge of his shield, and put a body into the mud with the weight of a man who knew exactly how much force a body could take before it quit. 4 more bodies dragged themselves from the fog's hem, answering the first group's cut-off cries. The clearing erupted, steel and magic, bathed in the light of the forest on fire. Dorian's gauntlet arced energy with a line of blue light as he grabbed the closest robed throat and tightened. The man went down, clawing at air that didn't exist. Jackson's blade, Melody's edge, performed a show, but the rhythm was in his movements: strike, slip, duck, and grin, like a song he'd learned in another life. Gabriel felt a gruff hand on his shoulder as a huge man appeared next to him, whirling him around. The man smirked from under the shadow of his hood and readied his sword for a deadly plunge. Instead, his eyes went wide and his mouth gaped, his breath stopped, and he collapsed in a heap. In the shadow of the huge figure, Leaf appeared, dagger glistening red, eyes quiet, mouth set in a line that might once have been gentle. He nodded to Gabriel, then disappeared back into the darkness of the dancing shadows. When the skirmish ended, it did so the way these things always do, abruptly, as if someone had snapped a bad dream in half. Among the bodies lying in the mud, a boy moved, gingerly, pale, barely whiskered, eyes brown, wide as lamp glass. His hood had fallen back in the fight, and his hair lay across his brow in a dark, wet smattering. The sigil on his robe had been painted, not stitched. He groaned faintly. Dorian was the first to him. He shelved his machine's stillness and lifted the boy gently with his bare hand, gauntlet hovering like a nervous second opinion. Easy, he said, which is what you say when easy is nowhere near you. You're safe for now. The boy's eyes flickered in a slow, broken way. His lips formed a shape before sound found them. They are singing, he whispered. Down by the bog. Red light. In a house. A circle. Who did this to you? Gabriel asked. He kept his knife at his side, as if moving it would frighten the words away. The sun, the boy said, and the words sounded like someone else's mouth had borrowed his. Crimson sun. The pale king, he... The air changed. It brightened inside the darkness, as if a coal had been dropped into the boy's throat. Dorian jerked his hand back as a heat he couldn't measure ran up his fingers. A red shine passed under the boy's skin, blooming in his veins like sick roses. The boy tried to breathe. He managed the shape of it. He managed the intent. His body gave up instead. He fell into ash, cloak caving into a gray mist that the wind treated rudely. No one spoke. The crackle of Cassian's fire made comments in the brush. Gabriel knelt and took a pinch of the ash into his palm. He held it up in the orange light. A tether, he said. Something keyed to thought. If he approached the words they feared, the charm ripped the mind out of him. Conditioning, Dorian said, voice tight, and a kill switch for loose tongues. Saberic's jaw unclenched. They got into his head, made him theirs, then burned the evidence the minute he remembered being a person. Dorian sifted the ash with metal fingers, the gauntlet's inlaid runes sampling what little residue a life leaves. He found a half-burned scrap of parchment, the ink blurred but legible enough, a wheel of marks, a cross line through a grove symbol, and a charcoal arrow pointing deeper into the woods. Here, he said, passing it to Jackson. A ritual mark. Has to be close. We should hide these bodies, before we leave. Leaf spoke up from the shadows, eyes darting back towards the town. Quickly, Dorian replied. They got to work, dragging the dead zealots into the darkness of the forest outside the town's fencing. The fire had luckily consumed and contained itself as the party moved past the edge of town deeper into the marsh, leaving behind the charred remnants of trees and brush, smoke curling into the night sky. The trees huddled closer, the path dissolved into the idea of one. Moonlight begun to beam into the canopy. Somewhere, water moved slowly through tall grass. After a 20-minute walk, they saw the hovel before they heard the chant. A ruin slumped against a stand of fir trees like a drunk at confession. Stones that had given up on their old agreements. The roof had more holes than structure, and vines had written a new script over what used to be walls. A shallow light, red, gold, pulsing, leaking out between the ribs of the place. The chant came after, a droning circle of sound that tightened itself with each revolution. 6, Cassian said from the dark, counting shadows, and a 7th, bound. A bound figure knelt at the circle's heart, head hung, hands lashed to a post. The cultists moved around him with the reverent impatience of men who wanted their gods to arrive on time. Their blades flashed occasionally when they lifted them to punctuate a word. Fast, Dorian said. We break the ring and take them alive. Dion's grin did something impolite and delighted. Alive is negotiable. They were about to move when the marsh decided it was tired of delay. A blur entered the ruin from the far side. No warning, only force. A body hit another body, and 2 heads found each other like old friends. The sound, wet pottery breaking under a boot, arrived before comprehension. A woman stepped through the falling cultists as if passing through a curtain. Red hair bright as a wound in moonlight, armor so black that it swallowed the firelight, and a hammer on her back that required a spine made of metal to wield. She dropped the crushed men, reached over her shoulder, and pulled the warhammer down in a clean vertical sentence. The head struck the hovel's floor beside a 3rd cultist, and it persuaded him to be elsewhere. Juno didn't look to see if anyone approved. Friends? Dion said under his breath, awed and cheerful in equal measure. Friends. Maybe later, Dorian replied and went in through the open door. The circle of robed cultists broke like a cheap plate. Jackson's sword severed a hand. Leaf's knife discovered a gap between a ribcage, and Saberic carved 2 in half before they could even react. And another one of Cassian's arrows found a shoulder and nailed it to the hovel's old idea of a wall. As the fight moved swiftly, so did the flames inside the circle. With the leader's frantic chanting, the flames began to dance and flicker, growing in both heat and intensity. The captive began to burn alive, the searing of flesh mixing with his immediate screams. Juno moved like gravity chose her in particular. She swung, stepped, swung, and each swing was a verdict. Moving directly towards the cult leader, standing atop a pedestal over the circle of markings on the floor, and with a wide, arcing blow, slammed her hammer into his chest with a hollow thunk, sending him flying backwards into the wall where he collapsed into a mess of broken bones. The flames immediately subsided. The etched markings ceased to glow. The burned victim's skin cooled and his body sagged against the post. "Cut him loose," Dorian said, and Cassian's knife obeyed. They had one left to speak with, a narrow-faced man whose eyes held that particular clerical fever that turns the future into a weapon. Juno pulled up his broken body and held it against the wall. The man smiled around his split lip. "You can't hold back a tide with a bucket," he said, delighted by his own metaphor. "The Pale King stirs. The blood moon approaches. You are gnats on a coffin lid." "Which coffin?" Jackson said mildly. "And how do we close it again?" The man laughed, a high, pleasing sound that would have sold candles at a Saint's Day market. "You've seen a sliver," he breathed. "You cannot stop fate itself." Gabriel watched his eyes, not his mouth. "He's listening, not to us, to something that doesn't care if he lives." Dorian nodded once. "Talk now," he told the cultist, "and I'll make your passing less painful." The man's pupils widened until they turned his eyes into a sky with no weather. He opened his mouth. The light found him. Red from inside again. It rose through him like a confession you don't mean. He convulsed, then arched, then crumbled. Ash, a smear of heat, and the old floorboards kept the mark of where a man had decided to stop being a man. Silence took the hovel in a hard hand. Juno leaned her hammer against her shoulder, breath steaming. She looked at them one by one, honestly, like someone evaluating a bridge she might have to cross. "If you're the others from the letter," she said, "you're late." Dion stared at her, thoroughly awestruck, as if staring at a beautiful flower. Me, Dion," he managed, as if names were suddenly complicated. "That was magnificent." "Necessary," she replied, which made it worse for him and better for the rest. The rescued villager clung to Cassian's arm like a rock in a river. "They came at dusk," he whispered. "Took my wife first. Said the sun requires tribute. He swallowed a piece of himself. I didn't see her again." "We'll look," Cassian said, the words, for once, neither oath nor apology, just promise. Amidst the robe and ashes of the cult leader, something glistening caught Gabriel's eye. Kneeling down over the pile where the body was, he reached down and pulled out a silvered hand mirror, ornate and carved with filigree. Turning it over in his hand, he stood up and held it, peering into the mirrored glass. Suddenly, it turned to liquid, no longer showing his reflection, but showing a dark swirling vortex that everyone in the room was locked into. The blackness turned into a mountainscape. Like looking through the eyes of an eagle, the view soared over rocks and valleys, through dark forests and over roaring and twisting rivers. It started to slow at the base of a dark and jagged mountain range, and as the scene panned up, it locked onto a castle, high in the mountains, with its spires sticking up into the sky in front of a blood-red moon backdrop. Then, in the archway of a window high in one of the towers, a shadow formed. As the image got closer, the shadow became a man. Then two yellow, piercing eyes appeared, as bright as the sun, and the glass shattered in Gabriel's hand. "Well, that was ominous," he said, looking back down at the mirror. The glass then appeared normal and unbroken. The others nervously looked at each other, not knowing what to say. "I'm sure that mirror of nightmares is nothing to worry about, guys," Jackson laughed, trying to make light of recent events. They stepped out into the clearing. The clouds, like every greedy thing, had gathered while no one watched. The moon went from a bright coin to nothing, disappearing behind the clouds. The wind brought the smell of iron with it, as if it was proud of the find. Then, the sky opened, and a face arranged itself there. Pale, regal, beautiful the way the winter is beautiful when it kills what you love. The eyes burned a cold, lidless gold, and when the mouth formed, it borrowed every voice anyone present had ever feared. "You know nothing of the horrors to come."
And that wraps up another episode of the Seven Masks of Malice. I hope you're enjoying the journey and you're excited for what comes next. If you are, of course, don't forget to hit the subscribe, the like, the bell, do the things that help me out. And of course, we'll see you right here, same time, same place, next week.